Welcome back to our study of the Constitution of the Sacred Liturgy. I'm here today with Margi Horner, the Director of Liturgy at the Church of the Jesu here in Milwaukee. And it's great to be here with you again to talk.
It's good to be back with you, Rock.
And Margi gets to look at, with me, some of the theological heart of the Constitution. And no pressure. So would you lead us into this by a reading, and then we'll talk about the words and phrases that stand out.
Be happy to. This is Article 10. The liturgy is the summit toward which the activity of the church is directed. At the same time, it is the font from which all the church's power flows. For the aim and object of apostolic works is that all who are made children of God by faith and baptism should come together to praise God in the midst of His church, to take part in the sacrifice, and to eat the Lord's Supper. The liturgy in its turn moves the faithful, filled with the paschal sacraments, to be one in holiness. It prays that they may hold fast in their lives to what they have grasped by their faith, the renewal in the Eucharist of the covenant between the Lord and His people draws the faithful into the compelling love of Christ and sets them on fire. From the liturgy, therefore, particularly the Eucharist, grace is poured forth upon us as from a fountain. The liturgy is the source for achieving in the most effective way possible human sanctification and God's glorification, the end to which all the church's other activities are directed.
And I'm sure in just hearing that, our people who are viewing this will see how weighty this article is. So would you point out the things, the words and the phrases that stood out to you?
Well, this is one of the most quoted articles out of the document. I know people use it a lot. And obviously the first things that strike me are the liturgy is the summit and it is the source. It is the summit towards which we work, and it is the source from which Christ's power flows. And those are the things that strike me the most. And also the fact that within the liturgy we are called to holiness, and it is a renewal of our covenant with God. And hopefully that the liturgy sets us on fire to go out into the world. So those are the things that strike me when I first read these.
That's very good. So let's do some reflecting on this thing.
Okay.
Talk about summit and source. What have you seen as an example for us to see? What is summit and source? How have you seen that?
Well, maybe before I give an example, I'll try to tackle how I understand it. To me, the liturgy being the summit towards which the activity of the church is directed, to me that's where what I get from that is that when we gather, again, this is our community gathered, so it's a communal prayer. When we all gather together for liturgy, we come with where we're at. You know, we don't try and make ourselves holy before we get there. We come with what's been going on in our lives, whether we're suffering from anxiety or depression, or whether someone died, or whether we had a great, wonderful, joyous, celebration of a birth or a baptism or something. But wherever we are in life, we bring all of that together, because that's what we bring as an offering when we gather in that liturgy. And all of that is somehow graced and blessed as we come together to bring us up that summit, to bring us up towards God. And that's where I see liturgy being that summit towards where we reach. And liturgy being the source, for me, it's also a reminder that when I gather there, that's where I can kind of be refreshed and renewed in my relationship with God. Because if I'm out of relationship with God, how can I go out in the world and be a disciple? And how can I go out and live the gospel, which I believe was said in the last article about how we have to be the gospel. So for me, the liturgy being the source means it's where I come to be nourished by the word, in the scriptures, the preaching, the prayers, and through the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ. And also in the people that are gathered around me, that they're sort of my source of strength too, because we're all in this together. So
I like that.
yeah. So when you come to an example of how I've seen this work, I think the first thing that comes to mind is I think about the parishioners who come in who are going through a difficult time, and you know that, you talk to them and they're saying, you know, my son's sick or this and that going on. And at the end of the liturgy, you go and you talk to them again, and you get a sense they've been uplifted and something moved them and changed them. And so it didn't take away what they're going through, but it enriched them and it nourished them. And also the same, it's so nice. Also, I help with a lot of the weddings, as you know, at our church, and which are very joyous occasions. And that whole liturgy too, it sort of culminates, you know, as the bride and groom walk out with the big music and everything. But you get the sense of the joy of that occasion and how God's grace moved through all of what happened there in the vows and the celebratory nature of it all. So,
you know what stands out to me, I had never thought of this before, but the liturgy being the source, we're called to that. So there's a drawing, and then at the conclusion of the liturgy of the Mass, we're sent, just like at the wedding, just like in other situations. Right. And both of those maybe bear more theological reflection.
I think so, and I think what we can do as people who help prepare liturgies, whether as a preacher or as a liturgist or whatever, what we can do is whatever we can within the confines of the liturgy to help people engage and get into that source. I love the words here where it says, the grace is poured over us like a fountain. That's so refreshing, and to help people maybe encounter that in some extent when they come to pray, and that they get that sense that they have received that grace.
Yes.
And I always say, if I can accomplish that in a liturgy, that people can go away, that they've encountered God, even if it's in one moment, that was a good liturgy.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you then. So, the grace is poured forth like a fountain. The compelling love of Christ sets them on fire. Seems like the language of the ideal, because it don't happen all the time, does it?
You're right. But I think that's what we want to strive for, and what we want to. And I think, bottom line, it's all God's grace. It's through God's initiative. What we can do is to do our very best to help people encounter that God, encounter Christ, and to remind them that they're coming here to bring wherever they're at in their life, and to be renewed. And if we can do that, you're right, it doesn't always happen. But I think we have to continue to make the effort. And it's, again, to remember it's always God's grace. It's not my efforts, it's God's grace that helps.
And what I hear you saying underneath that is that we should avoid the tyranny of the ideal, which should be there as a drawing.
Well, you always strive for the ideal, but that doesn't necessarily mean you accomplish the ideal, especially when it comes to our relationship with God. We all know the end result's not going to come in our lifetime here, but we always want to work towards it.
That's a wonderful way to conclude this thing, I think. You've been really helpful in highlighting the summit and source, and the way that you work with the people at Jesu, and with the priests and the presiders and the musicians and all of us, to make that a living reality as best we can do it as human beings right now. Well, thank you for your work there, and thank you for your reflections today.
Well, thank you, Rock. It's
Margie.
been nice to be part of this.
Yeah, nice to shake your hand, too. Thanks, Margie.
Thank you.
So thank you all very much for tuning in. This had been number 10. We're going to turn next to Article 11. I invite you to look in at that now. So thank you very much.